Welcome, folks. We're going to get going here. Welcome tonight to Legislative Advocacy 101. We're delighted to have Tom Houle and Eóin Small here tonight. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. The session tonight is on Zoom, so if you have questions, we're going to hold them to the end, and you need to have a microphone. So let's get started. We're going to light the chalice, and we're going to use a chalice lighting that we use with our Indigenous Justice Team. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people, united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark us in a spirit of humility. May it ignite us in radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. So just a brief introduction that this night came together because the community outreach teams of Indigenous Justice and the Indigenous Justice and Act for the Earth teams, climate justice teams, wanted to both have something prepared for all of you in leading up to the 2026 legislative session. And we had two excellent resources to provide you information both on how to do legislative advocacy and with both of our community partners, which is Rise and Repair Community. So we have Tom Houle here, who said I could introduce him as, this is Tom, he's just a guy. But Tom is a volunteer and advocate and a member of the Minnesota Repair Communities of Makoce Ikikcupi, which is one of our Indigenous team's partners. And Eóin Small is the Alliance Organizer and Facilitator for Rise and Repair, which is also one of our partners in Indigenous Justice and Climate Action. So I'm going to turn it over so they have lots of time to talk. Please make them feel welcome.
Thank you, Teresa. And welcome, everybody. It's nice to be back. I presented here a year or so ago on a different legislative issue. The reason for this presentation, how it was developed, was as you'll hear in some of my comments, the legislative session last year was a tough one, and we anticipated this one coming would be as well. And so this presentation was in the hopes of enrolling allies that would get more involved to help us move some of the legislation we think really needs to move. So that's why this was developed. I use this slide. I grew up in the Northeast of the United States. I was born in Connecticut and lived there up until 5 years ago. And so I tell my friends back east, the sky is always blue and the sun is always shining in Minnesota. Here's what we're going to cover. And this is not about giving you a test at the end of it. So I'm going to really do a cursory thing just so you understand the way the system works in terms of how an idea becomes a bill, how a bill becomes a law, how you can get engaged in the process. I'm going to give you 11 ways that you can get engaged. In doing all this kind of work, I'm a firm believer in meeting people where they are. If you try and get them to stretch too far, you're not going to be very successful. And Eóin's going to have some more comments about some of the models that cause us to think about that at the end. So ways that you can do just from sitting in your chair at home, all the way to being a lobbyist in the Capitol if you wanted to be. And so it's all sort of an increasing ramp up, and we're kind of hoping we'll get you to move to the next step. And then how you can track progress on bills. So a few notes before we start. We'll use Senate examples in the presentation. We're also going to use a bill that we were trying to help save wild rice. And so we'll be talking about that because that's going to be an important bill. It's going to continue. It's actually going to continue as 4 bills in the next session. We're going to use a Senate example. As I said, the House has a similar process, but it's a little bit different. We're going to cover the normal case. Almost every piece of legislation goes its own way. And so I could spend a month telling you all about that, and that's not my intention tonight. And P.S., the process is designed to be complicated. How goofy does that sound? But there is some rationale to it. They say the Senate and the House are to check on each other. That's a good thing. It's to ensure thoughtful consideration of each bill so things don't move too fast, so people kind of get to work on them and wrestle them for a while. It also purposely limits the number of bills that get passed, and that's by design. How many bills do you think will get taken up in a 2-year session, which we have here in Minnesota? Just shout out a number if you got one. The total bills. How many total bills will get taken up? Any other guess? You get a load of that number. Between 6,000 and 8,000. So if you're worried, if you're wondering about whether I didn't say they all got passed. I say they're going to find their way into the mill. And so if you don't think your legislators work hard, they work very hard. I will also say, as you'll hear in the presentation, I'm from the West Metro, so I live in Minnetonka. And so I'll be using also some examples from the legislators in my district, because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So how an idea becomes a bill. The idea starts with somebody that has an idea. And so for wild rice, it was Leanna Goose, who is an enrolled member of the Anishinaabe Nation up in Leech Lake. She is also a key organizer within Rise and Repair. She then needs to get a senator. Remember, we're using a Senate example, so she needs to have a senator who's willing to author the bill. And in this case, it was Senator Mary Kunesh, who also is an Indigenous person. Her family is from Standing Rock. The idea person and the author get together and write up a bill. It's like, okay, so what do we want this thing to do? And they kind of write it all out. And once they say, yep, that's the essence, Leanna says to Mary, that's what I'm hoping to get, it then gets passed to what's called the Office of the Reviser, lawyers. Because almost every piece of legislation in some way is going to impact other pieces of legislation. And so the Office of the Reviser helps put things in context and in their proper legal format. They also compare it to existing laws and make sure that it's not inconsistent with things that are there. Other things that might be considered. We now want to say, as this thing is going to move along to its next steps, the idea person, the author, and the reviser work together until they reach consensus on the wording of the bill. I actually hit this button, I didn't realize it, my apologies. And that can go quickly or it can take many revisions. I worked on a piece of legislation called the Indian Recovery Act, and we worked in that loop for 2 years. And it never made it to the floor because we had challenges getting alignment across all the tribal nations in the state on exactly the wording of it. And that happens sometimes. Other considerations are getting the support of constituents affected by the legislation. That's what caused us some problems. How many subcommittees the bill might have to pass through, and that's going to be an important, keep that in the back of your mind, how many committees it has to move through, because I'm going to come back to that. And then other things that you might need to consider. What's the political climate? You know, last year, for the first time in a long time here in the state of Minnesota, we had a power sharing arrangement where there was an equal number of Republicans and DFL people in the House. That was a challenge. Do we have support of the committee chairs? I've tried to introduce legislation where the head of the tax committee said, any bill that comes to me this year that includes a new tax will not see the light of day, period. Well, okay, I have to respect that. And so that wouldn't be a good session to introduce a bill that included a tax. That's real. The overall timing of the session and where are we in the session? You might remember in the last session, the Democrats didn't show up for a whole bunch of weeks because of that power sharing, things they couldn't agree on. And so the session was really shortened, and it was really, and that's important to understand because of all the steps this has to go through, as you'll see. So then after that, we've gone through that. The next thing that happened, just a step, which is kind of fun, it gets jacketed. That's in the bill gets placed in a sort of official folder, and we see we've got colors designated, yellow for the Senate and green for the House. And now the bill is ready to be introduced. So that's how a bill gets created. Hopefully, you might remember at the very beginning I said House and Senate. In order for a bill to become law in this state, there has to be a bill passed with identical wording in both the House and the Senate. So hopefully, there's also an author in the House that has been moving along with wording along the same way. They call that a companion bill. I'm not expecting you to read this. I think it's rude to put up something that people can't read, but what I wanted just to show you is what a bill looked like. And so that's what a bill looks like. You can see it's got lots of words. There's a number on every single line. The original text of the Wild Rice Protection Bill was 7 pages long. There was a whole lot of stuff in there. And one of the most important things is at the very top of that, it says, a bill for an act relating to the environment. That's a key phrase because that determined the first committee it's going to go to. We also realized, as introduced, it would have had to go through several committees. And you'll see how that would have been a real challenge in a shortened session. So that's what a bill actually, of the first page of a bill actually looks like. The detailed points that were in that made it 7 pages long. It said we want to have pesticide provisions because some people, we have a thing called the sulfate standard, which keeps the water cleaner. There was a real push to remove that sulfate standard, which has been in place for a long time, and not allow other pesticides into the water. Big thing, wild rice grows in water. Risk justification permits. If you're going to do a mine, what are the possibilities that the mine is going to pollute the wild rice waters? Well, 100% right now. The kinds of mines that are actively being pursued right now in the northern part of the state have a 100% failure rate, the types of mines. So that's an important thing. Operation of watercraft. It would never occur to any of you to be driving down next to a farmer's field. It was beautifully planted with rows of corn. It would never occur to you to pull off the road and just plow right through the middle of that cornfield, would it? Sadly, people that drive motorized watercraft don't always have that same discernment. And so that was a simple thing that said, don't drive a boat through wild rice beds. And then you can see the other things that were on there. So it was a pretty complicated bill. It was originally. So now how does that become a law now that we've got it there? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to gain support. Remember, I said the bill is ready to be introduced, but you want to get some support before you introduce it, hopefully. So one of the first things you want to do is you want to enroll some co-authors. I said that Mary Kunesh was the primary author that was carrying it. In the Senate, you can have up to 4 co-authors. And so that's a good thing. It would be helpful if those are from multiple parties. That would be great if you had bipartisan support, or if you had co-authors that were on important committees that were going to have to hear this bill, that would be a good thing. It's also good to enroll external support to provide testimony at hearings. That's you all, folks. We are that external support. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to show up and testify at a committee meeting. And then once you've got some support, the bill is ready for what's called its first reading, which really isn't a reading at all, but it's a good word, I guess. So when the bill is introduced, the first reading is done by the author on the floor of the Senate chamber. So the bill is introduced, and pretty much that first paragraph is read that you saw on that first page. There's no discussion about the bill. It's just sort of like, here it is. The bill gets a number, and the Senate president refers the bill to the appropriate Senate committee to have the first hearing on it, which probably raises in your mind, I wonder who are those committees? So here are the numbers here are the committees that we've had in the last, never mind, I'll come right back to that. This is an actual page from the minutes of the Senate meeting for that day. Interesting thing up here in the top, you'll see the Senate Journal for February 10th, page 344. So a lot happened that day. There were actually 127 bills introduced on the Senate floor that day. And again, in the red box, you see Senator Kunesh introduced a bill for an act relating to the environment. And then it lists those sort of 7 things, modifying pesticides and watercraft and yada, yada. And then on the very bottom where you see the big red arrow, it says refer to the Committee on Environment, Climate, and Legacy. So that's the first committee that's going to hear this bill. As I said a moment ago, you probably are wondering how many committees there are, I wonder. Well, here are the 22 committees that are in place in the Senate for this biennial. The numbers are how many senators sit on it. So Environment, Climate, and Legacy is bolded. There are 10 senators that sit on that committee. Sometimes a committee has so much coming out of this in a given year or a given 2-year session, they say, you know what, we need to create a subcommittee. So like, for instance, the first one at the top, which is Agriculture, Veterans, Broadband, and Rural Development. That's a whole lot of stuff, isn't it? And so they decided, you know what, we need a separate subcommittee on veterans because there's some important veterans legislation that needs to be considered. And so we'll create a subcommittee that will just be focused on that, which is a pretty good thing. But those are all the committees that hear things. So now we want to advance the bill. So the author schedules a meeting with that first committee. So in this case, Mary Kunish would have scheduled a committee with the environmental. She then introduces the bill in the committee room. Copies are made available to everybody on the committee so they can read it beforehand. If you are coming to listen or to testify, the copies will be available for you as well. So the senator introduces the bill, and then public testimony is given. Almost anybody can raise their hand beforehand, sign a sheet, and say, I want to give testimony on this bill. And testimony will be given both for and against. And sometimes it can be a long process. A lot of people can testify. Sometimes the chair of the committee will say, you know what, we're going to do 15 minutes of testimony today, and that's it. And so then the people presenting have to decide who's going to speak and who's not going to. Once the public testimony is done, then the committee has a detailed discussion, and you get to sit there and listen to it all. You get to actually watch it going back and forth. Those committee members, as a result of that conversation, can offer amendments. They can make changes to the bill. They may be friendly amendments. Friendly amendments could be just a nuanced thing or a request, or they could substantially change the bill, literally turn it inside out. And again, the author has a choice to either accept those amendments or to say, no, I don't think so. Once all that process is gone through, at some point, the head of the committee will call for a vote. A roll call vote of the committee is taken. Remember, if you saw the numbers on the slide, somewhere around a dozen people or less that are usually in a meeting. So they'll call each person's name. How do you vote, yay or nay? If approved by a majority vote, the bill then goes back to the full Senate for next steps or to the next committee maybe, if it has to go through multiple committees. And if it's not passed, let's see some of those amendments were discussed. They were kind of thorny. The author said, no, I don't want to do that. And the committee said, well, you know what? No, in this current state, we don't think this legislation could go forward. Then the author and the idea person have a choice to say, well, okay, let's go back and see if we can rework the bill, or maybe we wait for another session, or maybe we just fold our tent and go home. You don't know. This was what actually happened in that first committee meeting. The good news is it moved to the next step. And again, this is the minutes that you see there. The very first in the box, as you see, Senator Kunish offered an 8-2 amendment, which was passed by voice vote. I spoke about how complicated this bill was when it was first introduced or written. And both Leanna and Mary said, you know what, given where we are right now in its current state, this is not going to go forward. It's just don't have enough time. So they reduced the content of the bill significantly. That was the A2 amendment. And it was passed by a voice vote, again, not a roll call. Senate committee chair just said all in favor. Everybody said, yep, we accept the amendment. Then we went into public testimony, and you can see a long list of people that gave public testimony. And you see very different kinds of people. You see folks from environmental organizations, you see representatives of tribal nations, you'll see regular old civilians, you'll see my name 3 up from the bottom. And you'll see friends and colleagues and activists all on the list. So it's an extraordinary thing. And the good news was, again, the red box towards the bottom, Senator Hodge moved as amended, it would be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. So when they took the vote, it moved to the next step. And we were pretty happy about that. Then goes back to the whole Senate. So in this case, it was laid over for an omnibus. You've probably heard, just in your awareness of the news and the way things work in Washington, that often these big bills get brought up for a vote that literally have thousands of pages. And there's a lot of complaining because things get slipped into those bills. Because you can't pass parts of it. You either pass the whole bill or you pass no bill. And so what was going on in the session at the end of last year, because they ran out of time, everything got crammed into what's called an omnibus bill. And so it was either all going to get passed or none of it was going to get passed. For tonight, just because I'm trying to give you an overview, let's make believe that didn't happen. If it went forward as a standalone single bill, it would have gone back then to the whole Senate, And now they would have had a discussion on it in the whole Senate. And there would have been an opportunity for discussions and amendments. Now, no public testimony in that case because it's the full Senate. There would have been a floor vote, and that's kind of all in favor. Aye, the loudest one wins. It moves on, and then it's placed on the calendar. Remember, I said in my second slide, complicated process by design, many steps. Just for fun, that is the Senate chamber. It's a really spectacular building. I've always kind of questioned that red rug, but it's quite a beautiful building. And the Senate chamber within the Capitol, which is a beautiful building, is really something to see. Once it comes up on the calendar, then the third reading is given. And then a roll call vote is taken, where the name of every senator is called and it's recorded, are they voting yea or nay? If they were to pass the bill, it's then sent to the House. Because remember I said identical wording has to pass in both sides of the government. And so hopefully the House bill was moving along. Hopefully it had similar wording, but the Senate version goes to the House. The House then could say, well, we like this bill, but something about page 4 just bugs us. And so we're going to propose an amendment to this and send it back to the Senate. So it has to go back to the Senate for approval. If the Senate doesn't approve the changes, then the bill goes to a conference committee for resolution, because you got to get to that same wording. This actually is a picture of a conference committee working last year. I liked it because that is my senator in the sort of violet sweater there, Ann Johnson Stewart. It's composed of 3 or 5 senators, an equal number of representatives, and they just work away until they can find some wording that works for both parties. Once resolved, now both chambers have to revote. So it goes back to the House, it goes back to the Senate. They all vote on it. If they all like it and both chambers repass the bill, it then goes to the governor. And you all know what the governor can do with a piece of legislation. Governor can sign it, or the governor can veto it. If the governor signs it, it's a bill. It's a bill that became a law. And so that's the process. Again, not the intention that you would know enough to take a test, but just so that you could have a context for where this thing goes in there, where you can plug in and how you can. And so here you go. I'm now going to give you 11 ways to get involved. This is the important stuff. I also, as I said before, I hope I said it before, I'm a real firm believer in meeting people where they are. So there's something for all of you in this. First one, do you know how to contact your elected officials? Do you know who your elected officials are? I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I've had people come up after me and say, Tom, I didn't know who my elected officials were. Cool. First step, figure it out. I'm going to show you how to do that. Once you know who they are, you can subscribe to their newsletters and updates. By doing that, you can understand what they're passionate about, what they're involved in, what committees they're sitting on, what issues they are really involved with. That's important. You learn what they stand for. And that's an important thing for you to say, does my elected official stand for things that are important to me or not? You haven't left your home yet. You haven't left your couch if you've got a portable piece of technology. The fourth way of these 11 you can get involved is then once you know who they are, you know how to contact them, you get their letters, you know what they're involved in, reach out to them. They love to hear from you. Also introduce yourself to their legislative assistant or their LA. The LA is the gatekeeper. That's the person who really is the first reader of all those emails and letters, and they're sitting outside the office if you want to go visit them. So an important person. These are often young people recently out of their university training. They are eager, they are hardworking as the dickens, and I've never met one that I didn't think was lovely. So they're important people. Number 5, attend an in-district town hall meeting. I don't know what's true in all the districts, but I know my rep and my senator hold pretty regularly ones, as does Kelly Morrison, who is our U.S. House representative. If you go to an in-district town hall meeting, introduce yourself and thank them, and thank the LA, who's probably working furiously at that meeting because they did a lot of the organizing and a lot of the setup. Let them know you have called or emailed before. Some people say to me, Tom, does my voice really make a difference in all the news and all the noise? Yes, it does. You'd be surprised how little it takes to break through the noise. So like, for instance, when I first met my House rep, Patty Acomb, over in District 45, I got my Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative shirt on, so we were talking deeply affordable housing. And I had an appointment with her, and I was walking down the hall. She was standing outside of her office saying goodbye to somebody. And I said, "Hi, Patty, it's Tom Houle." And she said, "I know you. You email me." First time I met her, she said, "You email me." She knew the name. Now, did the LA prime her? Probably, but still a beautiful thing. A beautiful thing. It makes a difference. Number 6. So now you've left your home and you've driven up to the Capitol. And so you can sit in on a committee meeting. You don't have to say a word. You can just watch. It's an extraordinary thing. And what I encourage everybody to do, if you want to have your heart broken, sit in on a committee of Health and Human Services. Seriously, no, it's heartbreaking, because especially if any of you have ever worked in a care role, or if you have children that have disabilities, or in your family, the need versus what's available. And you can also send a follow-up email. So you can sit there just anonymously, but you can take it all in, and then you can respond after the fact. So you'll notice each one of these, you're getting a little bit more involved. You've now left your home and you're up in the Capitol building. That is what one of the committee rooms looks like. So you sit. So this is the Senate main committee room. You can see that sort of half circle, which is where all the committee members sit, and the desk in the front is where the person making the presentation or introducing the bill or speaking about the bill is. So where do all of us sit? That's called packing the house, by the way. A call that this man put out one day and said, "We got to pack the house." And we did. This was actually a wild rice bill. That is Mary Kunish, sitting at the microphone, and sitting next to her is one of the people that gave testimony that day. Now, you'll also notice we look like a pretty subdued group. We weren't that day. Some of you might have been there. However, one of the things you can't do is you can't bring banners and signs, and you can't get loud and raucous, or at least you're not supposed to, because the word decorum will get sent out to you. However, afterwards, you can celebrate. And so that's Eóin right there. And so he was quite happy celebrating with all of us a day where we moved something to the next step, and that's always cause for celebration. The other fun part here is, that's Senator Hodge, who's the committee chair. That's Mary Kunish, and lots of the people that showed up to help and support. So it was a pretty cool day. The next way you can engage, so now you were just sitting there kind of passively. You can also participate in a rally day at the Capitol. And again, you can still do this anonymously if you want. The cool part is you're with a large group of like-minded friends. You've now gotten involved in a cause that's there to rally that day, and there's rallies going on every week for something. You can bring a sign, or you can not bring a sign. It often starts on the steps of the Capitol, especially when it's a beautiful day like I showed you with the sun out. Today might not have been so beautiful if we were in session. And then it usually moves into the rotunda. So here we are. This was a Rise and Repair Day. Here we are gathering on the steps. It happened to be a pretty nice day. Great place for being very visual, for the media to pick up, for us to get attention. And then we move into the rotunda, which again is a beautiful space. The second picture there is the rotunda, where you see that banner hanging with the medicine wheel on it. That is where the speakers are. If I were to zoom in, you would see that the person speaking at the podium that moment is wearing a clerical collar. And in that case, it was the bishop of the Lutheran Synod, the ELCA, in Minneapolis. And so I want to give a big thanks to our clergy who show up to support, all of our clergy, who show up to support a lot of stuff. And so that's also a very important piece. We're up to number 8. So now you can participate in a meeting with your elected official in your office, in their office. Now, some people say to me, "Oh, Tom, I couldn't go talk to my senator, like they're up here somewhere." You know, they get up in the morning, they make their coffee just like we do, folks. But again, my stated meet people where they are. It's like, okay. So would you be willing to go into your senator's office if you were part of a 2 or 3 person team? You don't even have to speak. If you'd be willing to take some notes, that might be really cool because that would be very helpful for us. Or are you willing to do that? And some people will say, "Oh, I could do that." And we'll give you a little training for what it's going to look like when it happens. So you're not just walking in cold. You'll have a sense for how it's going to go and what you should do. And by the way, they will be happy to see you. They are so gracious, and they're going to want a photo with you. And yes, I'm a ham. You're going to see a lot of photos of me in this. So there I am with my state senator. Number 9, help lobby for legislation with elected officials outside of your district. So it's kind of friendly if I'm in my district with an elected official who thinks the same way I think and believes in the same things I believe. But what if it's not? Or were you willing to go talk to somebody on the other side? This is where my lobbyist thing comes in. So I raised my hand to do that one day. And so I got an 8.5 by 11-inch sheet with 6 photographs on it. You know, they don't always give you a current photograph. And my job was to kind of lurk outside the main Senate room when the people were going to be coming in because there was a vote scheduled. And I'm looking at the sheet and I'm looking at people and thinking, "Oh man, I got to find these people." And then I'm going to walk with them, talking to them, and try and convince them of something. And there was a woman standing next to me, and she said, "So what are you doing today?" I said, "I'm trying to find these 6 people, and I don't know." And she said, "Well, I'm a lobbyist, and I know all of them." And I went, "Oh." And she said, "Come on over here and stand by the top of the stairs with me, because they're all going to come up that stair. And when I see one of those 6 come up, I'll give you a little elbow, and I'll say, 'That's George.'" And thank God, Spirit put her next to me, I'll tell you. She just took all this weight off of me, and I thought, "Oh, thank you." So now all I had to do was figure out what I was going to say while I was walking towards the committee room. But so that's the next thing you can do. Again, we're kind of ramping up. What's your adventure tolerance here? Number 10, give testimony at a public hearing. I showed you an example of on the Wild Rice Bill. I was one of the people who gave testimony. I can tell you I've also been just hanging out in committee rooms and got so upset by what the people that were speaking said. I sat there and thought to myself, I can't let that be the last thing that is said on this piece of legislation. So my hand goes up and the committee chair goes, the chair recognizes the man in the back with the, and they said, "If it pleases the committee chair, I'd like to make a few comments." And he says, "Sign your name in and come on up to the podium." And so now I'm literally speaking words as I'm thinking them. But it was going to be an important one. I won't bore you with what that was, but it's a good story. So you can do that. You can do it spontaneously, or you can do it by signing up beforehand. And for me, as you can probably tell, any reason to get in front of a crowd and speak is a good one. Number 11, you can go to the governor's office. So this was a deeply affordable housing bill called Starts with Home. And this was at the 22, I think this was, because you can see by some of the masks, it was at the tail end of COVID. You see lots of logos on the bottom of that board. Those were all the organizations that are involved in building in managing deeply affordable housing and servicing deeply affordable housing. And then all of us that were present signed our name on that big poster board, and we brought it to the governor's office to present it to him. So I got 4 more minutes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eóin. So you might say, "Well, that's all really well and good, Tom, but you're hanging out over there a lot, and you know how this stuff works. How do I know?" Here you go. I'm going to tell you a couple of real easy things, and it all happens from one website. And that's the key URL, and I'm going to ask Teresa to send this all out to you, or she's going to ask Heidi to send it all out to you. www.leg.mn.gov, and this is the landing page. You'll see where that red circle is. It says, "Who represents me?" You put your address in there. You put your address in there, and then you get, boop, your 5 elected representatives come up. So your state rep, your state senator, your U.S. House rep, and our 2 senators here in the state of Minnesota. And there you see Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar. For each one of them, you'll see that little box. I've got it circled for Ann, which says contact. So you click on that, and now you get Ann's page. And so you can see what district she's in, what her address is, all the committees that she's on, the bills that she's authored. But again, up at the top, you see the blue box. It says, subscribe to my newsletter. You click on that, and now you'll start getting a newsletter sent to you on a regular basis. Engage with cause-related organizations. You know, I talked about going to a rally day because you're with a bunch of like-minded people. Here are, so you can find a group you have passion with. These are groups that I'm engaged with. But almost, if you've got a passion about something, believe me, there's somebody at the Capitol advocating for it, and you can connect. You see Rise and Repair right there in the middle. So now once I've done all that, maybe there's a bunch of bills I'm interested in. How would I just go about tracking progress? Again, we go back to the same page. Like I said, it all starts from this one page. Bill search and status. I put the bill number in. And so here is the Wild Rice Bill, which was Senate File 1247. And this is all the latest stat at that point when I snapped this of what has happened to that bill. Every visual that I gave you in this presentation came from that page. So when I showed you what the actual bill looked like, when I showed you the minutes of the committee meeting, the minutes of when it was first introduced, it's all, the hot links are all right there. And so it's pretty easy to figure out what's going on with the bill. You'll also can get engaged and learn when it's going to come to committee and when public hearing is. Testimony is going to be available, and you can also sign up for that. Sometimes we only get 24 hours worth of notice. I referenced Eóin, who said he sends the word out and says, we got to pack the room. There's a committee meeting tomorrow. And I understand that everybody can't be available tomorrow because we all are at different places in our life stage and our time commitments. And but that's the way it happens sometimes. You can create an account for automatic tracking of bills, again, from that same page. It won't send you an update. You've got to go in and look. But with this one login, you can set up maybe 6 bills that you're interested in, and then you can track them. So in summary, hopefully today I have demystified the process a little bit. Yes, it's complicated. I have shown you simple and appropriate ways to get involved in the process, meet you where you are. You know, what's your thing? Given you the key web link site, and I'm hoping that's going to get sent out to all of you after the fact. It all happens on that page. We're not going to take questions just now because I'm going to hand this over to Eóin. So thank you for your attention. Again, always beautiful blue sky and sunny.
And I did get a pad that's getting passed around. So people who are here tonight, we will be emailing you some of the links that Tom has and some of Eóin's slides. Not the slides, no, but the Zoom link will be available for the recording, and Eóin's slides will be available.
Right. Okay, this was wonderful. Thank you, Tom. I certainly wish I had that breakdown before I started organizing at the legislature. So thank you. That's like instrumental. And I hope this has demystified it. It's a very complicated process. I'm going to pit stop really quickly. My name is Eóin Small. I use he, him pronouns. I'm organizing with this Rise and Repair Alliance, which is endeavoring to operate at the intersection of climate justice and Indigenous rights. My background is not in lobbying at the Capitol. My own personal, I think, activation point, if you want to call it, was the occupation at Standing Rock. Had anybody heard of what was happening in Standing Rock in 2016? I'm seeing a lot of yeses. Was anybody there? Okay, so I found myself basically showing up in the fall of 2016 and ended up staying in that occupation for about 5 months, and it changed my life. And so that was the kind of like point that turned me on, I think, as an activist. And from that period until about 2021, I was very involved, like organizing against the Line 3 tar sand oil pipeline. And I'm only sharing this because when we're in these spaces, we're talking about issues with our comrades around fires, maybe as we're locked down to a machine. And generally, what I had kind of felt is that the ideas that I was talking about, especially in Indigenous-led movements around climate, were, of course, the things that the people making all these decisions were thinking about. And what I realized really dramatically is how different the conversations are in these places where the decisions are being made. So I know it's been a big part of me and the work that I've been doing, and along with a lot of folks in here that have been part of this project. So I'm gonna walk through a couple things briefly. Tom mentioned this and brought up this idea of committee hearings. One of the things that you're gonna see around this room is some of these Protect Wild Rice signs, which I'm gonna maybe talk about in a sec. But this year, we have a really short legislative session. It starts on February 17th and it ends in May. So it's very short. We're still divided 50-50 just about in the House and Senate. So it's extremely competitive to try to have a hearing. I know that Tom was saying that, right, like you try to schedule a committee hearing in a committee. It's very competitive to do that. So, and honestly, a lot of this stuff gets prearranged at times like now, as people are making these kind of side room deals. So if an issue is not being elevated in the profile in the eyes of the legislature at a time like now, it is very unlikely, especially this year, that it will even get a committee hearing. So what we have done with the wild rice legislation is we've split that big bill, as Tom was walking through it, into 4 different sections that will be introduced, we believe, in 4 separate bills this year. And the intent is to limit the number of committees of jurisdiction that it has to move through. What you'll see on this QR code on this yard sign, which I'm hoping some folks take those, is a way to actually like connect with your legislator. So advocacy organizations like Rise and Repair, and you've probably all done this, write your legislator, right? And so we have tools that can make it very easy to like just kind of maybe adapt a message and send it in. So right now, if you follow this QR code, if you're on Zoom, or if you follow the QR code on this lawn sign, it will create, it'll link you to a form that will automatically, based on your address, tell you who your representative is. And then you can modify that message if you'd like, and then just hit send and it'll get sent via email. A little bit about Rise and Repair. This is a very diverse alliance of people and organizations operating on these issues. It emerged shortly after the passing of the Carbon Free by 2040 bill in the spring of 2023, with basically this like frame of, hey, this was good, this is a big step forward, and we have a lot more work to do, especially if we're focused on ideas around like climate justice. And so the Alliance has organized around kind of these 3 questions, which I'm going to focus on kind of the second one. How do we both transition to cleaner forms of energy and protect Indigenous sovereignty, tribal sovereignty, frontline and marginalized communities, as well as the environment? And what we see working with our Indigenous relatives is maybe like a difference in understanding around some of these proposed solutions and the potential impacts. And just as an example, has anybody here heard of the Water Over Nickel campaign by the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe? It's a PR campaign that the band has put forward to raise awareness about the Tamarack mine. And one of the facts that they cite is that 97% of the nickel deposits in North America reside within 35 miles of a Native American reservation, right? So as we are thinking through the lens of like solutions to climate, and we are trying to electrify, we're trying to go maybe the route of EVs. These are generally good solutions, and they do also have a footprint. And so when we go after all this lithium, where is it going to come from? When we go after the copper, the nickel, the sulfide, it's most likely going to be coming from Indigenous land and territories. So this is one of the kind of central parts of what this alliance is doing. That just jumped through a bunch. We've been sharing this manual around. It's called Hoodwinked in the Hothouse, Resisting False Solutions to Climate Change. What we've been trying to do with this alliance is basically track what leading Indigenous environmental organizations are amplifying at places like COP, talking about the United Nations, and we were trying to bring these ideas into state level politics. One of the resources that has been put forward is this very simple to read manual that kind of gives like an Indigenous perspective along the lines of a lot of the climate solutions that are being proposed. And so the third edition of this is basically out of print now. A fourth edition will be coming up, but it's available online at climatefallsolutions.org. Within our alliance, what we've been trying to do is look to this as a resource so that when an idea comes up like repealing Minnesota's nuclear moratorium, what does Hoodwinked have to say about nuclear energy, right? And just trying to like understand some of these issues. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I am struggling with a little bit of tech. I'm happy to deep dive into any of these things. I want to honor our time. Generally, what we are doing right now in Minnesota is we are fighting false climate solutions, things like industrial carbon capture and sequestration, the repeal of the nuclear moratorium that was implemented in 1994. We're opposing an incentive structure for large-scale mega dams, hydroelectric power. This is like damming the Mississippi River. And we're in solidarity with the Winiscatan Alliance up in Canada, which is an alliance of organizations that are impacted in communities that are impacted by large-scale hydroelectric dams. In Minnesota, a lot of our power actually comes from Manitoba Hydro, which operates out of Canada, and we bring that electricity into our grid. And so as we see these erosions and the expansion of what this idea of clean energy is, there is a push to include things like nuclear and hydro into what we define as clean energy, right? So that we can quote unquote meet our carbon free by 2040 laws. But large scale hydro is enormously damaging, especially to Indigenous communities up in Canada where these dams exist. Has anybody heard of these data center things? Right? Yeah. They're a mess. This was an issue that basically emerged in last session. We latched on as quickly as we could, and I'm looking around the room knowing how many people showed up when we mobilized it. I will literally say that it is the folks that showed up last year to apply pressure on data centers that made it into the issue that it was. This was going to be something that was going to get just snuck through. We learned about the legislative process. There was actually no committee hearings on any of the laws around data centers, and it emerged in the special session as a bill, right? So they're a big issue. Just to give you an example, we currently have 17 of these facilities being proposed in Minnesota. These are not your mom and pop data centers. These are hyperscale data centers, buildings that might span 80 acres in size. The electrical demand required to operate the facility being proposed in Pine Island is 700 megawatts. The electrical output of the Monticello nuclear reactor is 640 megawatts. So this one facility in Pine Island would require more than the output of an entire conventional nuclear reactor. And we have 17 of them proposed in Minnesota. So just to frame some of that, defending community solar net metering. If you have solar on your house, you might understand net metering. They're trying to make that go away. Fast tracking of permits, right? Like, trying to expedite the process of environmental review or like whatever permits a mine needs to open. The wild rice sulfate standard that Tom mentioned is being very, very much. There's a very concentrated effort that is actually coming from both parties to remove this standard. It limits the amount of sulfide to 10 milligrams per liter. And it was implemented, but almost never enforced by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The problem is that like mines cannot meet that standard. So the only way they're going to open up new mines in Minnesota is if one, the MPCA chooses to continue not enforcing that standard, and two, if they can repeal this law. So they're trying to remove that via legislation. And we're seeing it sneaking into bills. Like last year, there was a bill about unemployment benefits for miners that were being let go because of Trump's tariffs. And so like, let's give some more unemployment benefits. Oh, and then there's a little clause at the bottom, and we're going to repeal the wild rice sulfate standard, and it's like, no, no. promoting the good. We've talked about the wild rice legislation. We are trying to recognize the inherent right of Monoman to exist, thrive, and flourish in Minnesota. This idea around 100% electronic waste collection and recycling. Has anybody not heard of that bill? I know we're a very we know about that bill. Okay, so basic idea, like trying to create statewide infrastructure to gather the electronic waste that we have and make sure that it's recycled. If we did that, we'd recover about $2.2 billion worth of precious metals just in Minnesota every year from what gets thrown out into landfills. So as we're having this debate, do we open a new copper nickel sulfide mine, or do we just like pull the stuff out of the trash? You know, and I would argue that maybe pulling out of the trash might be better. We're trying to support these ideas around energy democracy, grid level expansion of distributed solar, right? So trying to like at the substation level build out renewable energy so we're more resilient in local communities. And then we are trying to return stolen land to our Indigenous relatives. The active pieces of legislation in the past handful of years have been the return of the upper eastern half of Red Lake to the Red Lake Nation Band. It was originally a part of the treaty that was signed to include all of Upper Red Lake. When the designated commissioners from the federal government returned to file the map with the United States, they just redrew a line through the center of the lake and then filed that. So that's why right now it's not within the bounds of the reservation. The Cloquet Forestry Center is another bill that would return about 3,200 acres of land around the Cloquet Forestry Center back to the Fond du Lac tribe. And then the entirety of the White Earth State Forest was actually carved out from the White Earth Reservation. So we're working on that. We got a couple things going on. Please subscribe. One of the tools that might help is our bill tracker. 8,000 bill introductions, whatever, over a 2-year cycle. The partner organizations in this alliance and people like myself, we read every bill that gets introduced. And if it's something that's good, we put that in one box. If it's something bad, we put it in another box. And so when we come across ideas, bills that are good or bad, we add them to that tracker. And so that you can always just go to riseandrepair.org/tracker, and you'll see that at least the legislation that we've flagged in the context of environmental issues, energy issues, and things that impact Indian country and Indigenous rights. So we're trying to at least simplify some of that process, but we don't cover everything. So if you're looking for that bill on healthcare or on housing, you know, make sure you're using that tool like My Bills. Oh my gosh, I'm clicking all around. I'm going to spend just a couple minutes around a couple organizing thoughts. Has anybody seen this model around the spectrum of allies? So we have a couple folks, right? I'm going to walk through it really quick. And just kind of reminding folks right now that, right, like when it comes to community organizing, relationships are never built on what we don't have in common, right? We build friendships, we build rapport on the things we have in common, and we might not agree on every issue, but how do we find common ground and build from that relationship? Some ways of thinking about organizing, right? Our goal is to bring the world as it is into line with the world as it ought to be. That's generally what we are trying to do. Nothing anybody in this room is going to do tonight that's going to change and fix every problem, but generally we're moving in that direction. A couple ways of defining what power is. We talk about community power in organizing quite often. I could probably debate with all of us about a million ways to rip apart this idea of power, but one way of thinking about it is power being the ability to make things happen the way we want them to. If I have the power and I want something to happen a certain way, it'll happen that way. And if I don't, I probably don't have the power to change something. So generally in community organizing, in communities like this, we are trying to build that power. Another way of thinking about it, organized people plus organized money plus organized ideas equals power. I want to say that folks on the far right are really good at this. They're really good at organizing their ideas, putting out Project 2025, talking to all the billionaires, and then bam, they have all the levers. So just as we think about these things. And then this idea of the spectrum of allies, right, is going from, does this thing have a laser pointer on it? Oh my gosh. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. I didn't realize that I'd be pointing all over. It's just a model of thinking about this. Generally, we are trying to move people from being in active opposition to us over to being active allies, right? I want to say that right now we are in a period where a lot of folks are moving into organizing. They're coming into meetings like this. They're joining 5051, the indivisible, whatever. They're absorbing. So often I think right now we're finding people that might have been neutral on an issue jumping one step over to being like maybe a passive ally. Like, I didn't really care about this, but I'm going to show up at that demonstration on the protest, or I'm going to choose to do that. There are probably also folks right now that were kind of against some of these ideas around justice, but they're like, actually, no, this isn't really my jam, with this Trump stuff. And they're maybe at least becoming neutral. Generally, in organizing, we're trying to bring people one notch over. Has anybody in the room experienced this before? Yeah. Somebody want to just share a little bit about like where they might have found themselves? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I did a text flex, and I'm looking at the clock. I'm sorry. This is.
I'll confess, I worked for the state for 30 years, technically not a lobbyist because the state employees are not lobbyists. But I've watched change on disability issues, on issues leading from independence. There's three main set of actors, and I'm not going to do the long thing, but one of them was the provider organizations, the people actually delivered the service. And if you look 25 years ago, you had services that were organizational centric and not individual centric. That is high. Everybody goes to this workshop, sits down, gets a job, we do good, they're taken care of. Over time, we had folks who were actively against the idea of closing these things were never true, but there were folks who were, in fact, sort of supporting it because that was the world they knew. And over 10, 15 years in conversations with advocates, with individuals, they moved from, if you will, passive observation to neutral, and eventually over time, and it was over time, it didn't happen instantaneously, they moved down that curve and change was possible. But it's also, the only thing I would say is that to make it work, you have to have open, honest conversation. Throughout that process, you meet people where they're at, and then you begin that. I don't know if that's helpful to you or not.
It's brilliantly helpful, and it's also, I think, going to segue us really well into this next slide also, which is kind of a companion thought to this, right? So generally in organizing, we're trying to bring people in, move them into our spaces. There's another idea that I have on our mind, which is the Overton window. And basically, and I think this actually complements what you were saying really well. Like the idea around the Overton window, it's a model for understanding how ideas in society change over time and influence politics. So the core concept is that politicians are limited in what policy ideas they can support. They generally only pursue policies that are widely accepted through society as legitimate policy options, right? There was a time in this country where if you were Black, you could not vote, right? Like that was the Overton window in which politicians were operating. We've moved that window, and we need to keep moving that window, right? So I encourage all of us, right, to hold this in our minds, because a lot of what we're doing with Rise and Repair, I would argue, is trying to expand that Overton window. And we're doing that very intentionally so that maybe some of these ideas that seem kind of crazy aren't going to be crazy in 2 years. And I want to also point out that the right is extremely good at doing this as well. Suddenly we're talking about Trump derangement syndrome. What the hell? You know what I mean? Like, it's like you're expanding us in this direction that's kind of wild. So I might skip a couple of these slides because I know we're running short on time. Generally, remember, the legislature does not make decisions. Individual people in the legislature make decisions. So think about that, right? who is your legislator? What can I do to influence that one person? How do I engage in tactics to influence that one person? So we don't make broad claims. I want the Senate to do this, right? So just kind of thinking through that, and these are some of the ideas kind of around tactics and like how you could maybe influence what that legislator is going to do. We have an opening day rally on the first day of session this year. Things are going to be a little bit different. They're even differenter as of this afternoon. We're going to have to change the time because they're doing a memorial for Senator Hortman, and Representative Keeler called me today to say, can we shift the rally? So I'm going to, things are going to change a little bit, but our idea here, because of how short of the session is to show up strong, put these ideas forward, get our messages out, and make sure that our legislators know that these issues matter, because there's going to be a lot of things happening. The second day of session, February 18th, is going to be one of the larger, probably the largest mobilization around data centers at the Capitol. So if you care about the data center issue, please come out that second day. We'll be continuing to support our lobby visits in March. March 27th is the first and second legislative deadline this year. It's just been announced. The third is on April 17th. And then we're probably going to support another Earth Day mobilization this year. And we'll do our normal post. Yeah. Yes. So there is only so much time typically that as it's supposed to be. Generally, the first legislative deadlines means a bill that has been introduced has had a hearing in its first committee of jurisdiction, and it's been acted favorably. Right? So if a bill gets introduced and it doesn't get a hearing by that deadline, technically it's not supposed to move forward that year. By the second legislative deadline, you are supposed to have it acted on favorably in both houses, both the Senate and the House. And then I forgot what the third one is, to be honest. What is it? Yeah. Yeah. Right. So generally that first window of time, like literally the time between now and that first deadline, is when we have to pressure to have our bills heard, right? So that call to action right now on that wild rice sign is basically saying, dear legislator, these are some of the problems with wild rice. We don't like that the DNR flies over wild rice waters and drops glyphosate. That's what we do. That's what our state does. So we have indigenous folks in northern Minnesota showing up to harvest rice, getting notifications that there was just a pesticide applied to that wild rice water. And they're doing it to control invasive cattails. So that's what you'll see in that call to action. We need to get this stuff, these issues up in people's minds. If you care about something, pressure for that committee hearing. So thank you. We have a fundraising match. If you can support us, do it. We're going to try to extend it. And I want to maybe close with a song. Is that okay? Can we sing a song together? Is that all right? And so sorry for folks on Zoom. I don't know how this is going to translate. I'm going to move the mic a little bit. But do we know this song? It was originally, this is an adapted version by Alexandra Blakely. And I'm not the best at singing these community songs, but I think you'll know maybe this melody. So I'm going to try to sing through it once, and then maybe we can all jump in. And don't leave me hanging. Okay? Yeah, you're with me? Okay. Please prepare me to be a revolutionary, tough and tender, tried and true, and with each other we'll build another world together. Me and you, please prepare me to be a revolutionary, tough and tender, tried and true. Together, me and you. Cool. Yeah.
So I want you to go back one slide.
I want to first defer to our host tonight because I think I've blown some of our time window out of the water. So I'm fine to stick around.
Look, this is pop back one thing, because you're talking about being an effective advocate. On your list, February 3rd, is precinct caucuses. If you've never been part of a party process, it is extraordinarily important that you realize there's a parallel process. When back in my heyday, I could go into a lot of offices with face credibility because they had met me before the legislative process. I can't tell you how important it is if you are serious about advocacy about doing that. It's not just your legislator, it becomes the legislator who knows you as a human being and knows what you care about. And I'm done lecturing.
No, thank you. I'm glad you rewound. Can we do a quick time check with hosts just to know what?
Yeah, we'll be done at 8:30. I'm Sherry Knuth. I just want to make a couple comments. I'm with the Act for the Earth team, and we do what Rise and Repair is one of our primary organizations that we follow. We do have things in our newsletter about what Rise and Repair is doing, so you're always welcome to sign up for our newsletter. But as was mentioned by our speakers, sometimes things move so fast, it's hard for us to get the material turned over to you. So there is a sign-up sheet for the Rise and Repair organization here where you could get directly onto their mailing list for emails and get things up to date. So if there's a call for, turn out tomorrow for a hearing, you see it right away. And a lot of us from the Indigenous Justice and Act for the Earth have been showing up at the Capitol for the rallies and the hearings and stuff. So you're very likely to see some of our faces there. So be brave.
Thank you, Sherry. And I'll say that. So we have some Rise and Repair Alliance buttons. Grab one. We have a button for the work to protect Monoman. The graphics for both were done by Sarah Little Redfeather, an amazing Anishinaabe artist. We have these yard signs. Please take one if you would like. And the sign-up sheet, there was that scavenger hunt that I brought around. Did anybody look at any of the questions? Was anybody able to finish the whole thing? It's kind of tricky. Yeah, we can talk later. Precinct caucus wise, we just did our issue briefing as Rise and Repair last night. We probably by Saturday will have compiled all of the resolutions from our partner organizations into a Google folder, and we will make those available on the website. In particular, because I know this is a group focused on Indigenous rights, justice, and those types of things. This year, we are going to be promoting a resolution that says we support the return of unlawfully seized public lands to Indigenous tribes in Minnesota. We are hoping to move that one. We will have one for the rights of Monoman Pasine. We were successful 2 years ago in getting that on the action agenda for the DFL. We will have one on FPIC, which is free, prior, and informed consent, which is a framework to basically that was brought forward originally in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. They call that FPIC Light now, but it's an important principle around basically having consent and self-determination as Indigenous peoples. We have one calling for a health impact assessment, which is legislation that Mille Lacs will be working on. The idea around a health impact assessment is that anytime an environmental impact statement is triggered, there is also a Department of Health study on the health impacts. So when they build a mine next to Tamarack and then it contaminates the fish, which is what you might find in a EIS, what happens when the local community eats the fish? So it's a kind of a critical step there. And then I think I'm forgetting one more on there, but we'll do our best with caucuses. Please show up to caucuses.
Two things. When we talked about, and Sherry mentioned about going and showing up, a church that I have a lot of friends at, Edina Community Lutheran Church over in Edina, had a bunch of these beautiful blue t-shirts made up, and on it they say, "The church has left the building." And I love those shirts, and I always find 6 or 8 of them. And so I don't know if Unity is into t-shirts, But there can be a powerful thing about going to a rally day and immediately being able to say, oh, there's members of my congregation right over there. And so let's all stand together. The second thing I just wanted to say was, give this man a hand. Is this guy extraordinary or what? I mean, I'm just a guy, as I said. But when you see that caliber of person that is doing the organizing and leading these initiatives, I mean, it gets me out of my chair and wants me to show up. You know, this is a man that got me to show up. And so I have so much gratitude.
We have time for a couple questions, and I'm going to I've got your emails, and what we'll do is send probably a version of Owen's slides and that he's going to give us, and the links that Tom gave us. And but I want to see if there's questions. So I see Rick.
Yeah, thank you both, Tom and Owen. I was at the Capitol last spring. I think maybe even in one of those pictures you showed. I'm Rick McCormick from the Indigenous Justice Team. I wanted to say that I wanted to add that March, with your dates there, March 27th, you had is the first and second legislative deadlines. March 28th is going to be the next No Kings rally, just in case anyone is interested in that. But then the question I had was, it is just a very basic question about the wild rice bill being broken up into 4 pieces. Can someone just repeat what the 4 pieces are?
Definitely. And we are, in how we've worked on this, we are trying to basically interface directly with all of the 11 federally recognized tribes, as well as the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, which is a state agency intended to be a liaison in between. So the things that we've removed from the original introduction was the question around mapping, because it's a very it's a tense issue around, like, you know, the tribes do not have a self-interest to disclose where the wild rice waters are. So how do we do that, and how do we create an enforcement hook around that? So what we have settled on for this year is that one bill will recognize the inherent rights of Monoman to exist, thrive, and flourish. We are doing this following the model of inherent relationships jurisprudence that is put forward by the Indigenous Environmental Network. This idea that the relationship that our Anishinaabe relatives have with wild rice has been inherited for years. There's not a law that will change that relationship. And it's rooted in this idea of indigenous sovereignty. The second one will be a wild rice risk justification that Tom spoke about. So if a project is being proposed that would damage a wild rice waters, they have to go through a permitting process to do that and to have it justified in the public good. The third would be addressing this problem about pesticides and pesticides being applied near wild rice waters. The fourth are what Tom mentioned, is this idea of like driving motorized watercraft through wild rice waters. It's very damaging. The wakes are really damaging. So we are trying to put that into law. There's a fifth aspect of this that I think the White Earth tribal government will be pushing forward, to change the wild rice harvest date. So we will show up to support that, but we decided that they're going to take it, because right now in Minnesota, the wild rice harvest date opens on August 15th, regardless of if the wild rice is ready. So the DNR starts giving permits, people go out into the water, they start whacking these non-ready stalks of wild rice, which damages them. So we are trying to have that shift over to kind of model like the deer permit areas, where certain zones are opened up based on the conditions, and have that done with advice from the tribal councils and governments.
Also, pick up one of these sheets
Great.
from the table, and what Owen was just explaining is on here, along with a lot of the other things that they spoke of.
So what you'll see at riseandrepair.org/platform are the bills that we encourage folks to track. What is printed out and available, feel free to grab one. is right now kind of the summary of the issues we're focusing on, because a lot of these things will not have the bill number until they get what? Jacketed, introduced, right? So, you know, what we'll update on future handouts and on the website is like assigning bill numbers as well. Yep. And then those bill numbers will add into the tracker. And when that tracker turns yellow and says there's a committee hearing, that's when you got to show up.
Speaking of state agency type, what relationships do you have with, say, DNR and MPCA? How do you manage those relationships and the information that comes out of there? Because I can tell you, from having been inside the system, there's a lot of non-elected actors who have some serious input.
We are, I mean, some of it's complicated. I want to introduce a bill that changed it to the Department of Natural Relatives as opposed to resources, right? It's difficult. We had the DNR oppose the wild rice legislation. They did not want to recognize the inherent right of Monoman. It might have been because the Monoman in, I think, 2020, sued the DNR. Yeah, so Frank Bebo represented wild rice in a lawsuit against the Minnesota DNR because the White Earth Nation passed a tribal code recognizing the right of Monoman. So the Monoman sued the DNR. So they don't really like the idea of recognizing any more rights. It's delicate. As an example, in the DNR and the MPCA, there isn't a single standard operating procedure that acknowledges treaties and federal trust responsibilities. So we have treaties that are signed between the tribes and the US federal government, right? But the state agencies are the ones that give the permits. They issue the route permit for the pipeline, the this, that, and the other thing. And they have no standard operating procedure around how to act in a way that is in line with those treaties. So we're working on it slowly, right? We're trying to have some of these conversations to shift that thinking and just like, yeah, meetings. And meetings and more meetings, yep. And expanding that over to window. I mean, we were sitting down with the head of the DNR trying to explain this idea of inherent relationships, you know, and it's like, oh, I never thought about them as relatives. I never, you know, it's like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
All right, you guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Tom. Thank you so much.
Great.